citation that talks about Christ. You talk about Josephus, that his evidence was obviously added at 100 something AD. I forgot the exact quote. Josephus.
Josephus was probably added by Eusebius in 324.
Okay, that was the time. Is it that there is no evidence for God, or is it that any evidence that violates your faith, your belief that there is no God, must be rejected? Doesn't that make you a priest for atheism?
Yeah, perhaps it does make me a priest for atheism. You can determine what it was. I say that there's no reliable evidence for any God, specifically for Yahweh. Not only that, but just about any evidence that you could put forth is a God of the gaps, and just about any God could fulfill this. Who has heard of the Flying Spaghetti Monster? Flying Spaghetti Monster is a character put forth that has many of the characteristics. He is the creator of the universe, but he's a much nicer character. And that satisfies all the requirements of the God who created the universe, God who gave us morality, but it's kind of a silly argument. The point is that the concept of God, especially Yahweh, was created to fulfill our unknowns. And that's where he comes from. If this God is indeed a moral lawgiver, then I would ask people to ask what kind of morality is put forth in the Bible, where people are often killed on the littlest of whims. A guy was killed for out gathering sticks on the Sabbath. That I don't believe is moral at all. But that is the law put down by the supposed moral lawgiver. I think that's reprehensible. I think my concept that we love and care for each other because that's who we are as human beings is a much better understanding of how things come. And in a way, it's a much better story for us to understand who we are as human beings. You asked about Jesus, as I recall.
I asked why you reject all evidence.
Because there is no evidence. There is none. Outside of the Bible. Okay, there is the writers of the Gospels, we have no idea who they were. We know when they wrote, but we don't know who they were. It's just a story. Why can't you understand that it's just a story created, the character created initially by Paul and the delusions he likely had on the road to Damascus? Paul never met Jesus. The writers of the Gospels, we have no idea who they were, so there's no even way to determine that what they say is true. And nobody else of the time wrote of Jesus outside of the Gospels. This is astounding, absolutely astounding. Paul, who supposedly first wrote about Jesus, has no idea of the life of Jesus. He has no idea where Jesus was born. He has no idea where Jesus was, the concept of where he died. None of this exists within Paul. To Paul, Jesus was a sky god.
So if the gospel writers didn't write the gospels, then who wrote them? Why are they written saying John, John, the beloved apostle, wrote this, the one who wrote this in the epistles? I'm John, say hi to this person. If it wasn't John, why is this person saying that he's John? And there is no evidence. The earliest manuscript evidence that we have, what are we going to do with this? The John Rillian Papyrus, the John Rillian fragment, which they're housed in John Rillian Library in England, Manchester. They're right there. The Dead Sea Scrolls is one to support the Old Testament is the ones that we have. They're right there in the museum in Jerusalem. They're right, everybody can see them. What is that? If it's not evidence, what would we call it? You know? That's all I have to say for that.
Okay, my question's a little bit different. First, I actually want to apologize on behalf of Christians for offending atheists. Maybe we've said certain things or done certain things that really doesn't show love. So I want to apologize. And what would it look like for Christians to show love to atheists?
Well, thanks for getting my main concept, that we are driven by love and cooperation as human beings. I think that's a very good point. I think it's wrong to think that somehow atheists were wronged by Christians in the past, and thus we have some sort of anger towards Christians. The only anger that I feel is that Christianity is based on myths. It is not true. It teaches people not to understand the universe around us. It teaches all too often, that killing people in the name of their faith, in the name of one's faith, is acceptable. When we went into Iraq, a large proportion of evangelical Christians, something like 80%, thought that this war was somehow justified. I think that's reprehensible. History over time has shown all too many times for all religions that we can, and especially Christianity, because I'm more familiar with it, they've been perfectly willing to kill in the name of their religion, whether it's people of other faiths or people of the wrong internal Christian faith. I think that's reprehensible. As I said, I base my morality on harming people, and anything that harms people is thus wrong. But thanks for pointing out that love is a very important part. Thank you.
Okay, atheists or anybody who denies the absolute moral law, we're not saying that they can't believe it or they can't follow it. What we're saying is that they have no basis for it. There's no justification for it. They just have to follow it without any kind of cause for it, for the moral lawgiver. And I just want to say, if you guys can ask me some questions.
I'll ask you a question. Do you know about Moses and the Midianites? Where Moses is telling his people, hey, we're going to the Promised Land, we're going to the Promised Land. And they get there. There's people there. So Moses suddenly comes up with this story. These are terrible people, we got to kill them. So he sends out his army. Do you know the story? So he sends out his army and they kill. They win in battle and they kill all the men. So the army comes back to Moses. And they didn't kill off the women and the children. And Moses says, I told you to kill them. I want you to kill off all the non-virgin women, save the virgins for yourselves. I want you to kill off all the boys. Now, you're a general under Moses, and he just gave you this order. Would you follow the order? If so, what would you tell the people before you slaughtered them? Now, there's a question.
Okay, I haven't read that part in the Old Testament, but okay. So the question was how I would follow the order?
You're a general under Moses. He said, I told you to kill these people. Now, Moses is in direct contact with God, supposedly.
Right. Okay.
So he's got the word. He's got the word behind him. What would you do?
Well, if it was a direct contact with God, I would have to believe Moses, and I would have to follow what Moses said. But I don't believe that God would just do it arbitrarily. I think that He has basis for what He does, and since He is the unchanging standard of justice, nothing He can do, nothing He does will be unjustifiable. So if it's God's order, and if that's what the story says, then God had a basis for it, and God had a purpose for it. So I would follow God's order.
I'd like to know how many people think that this is a moral action. How many think that this is good? Who does? You would kill women and children because you were told God.
I'm sorry.
I rest my case.